You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Folks, last June, the conservative majority of the justices of the Supreme Court upheld Ohio's controversial use it or lose it voting law by a 5-4 margin. The law allows the state to purge voters from the registration rolls if they fail to return a mailed address confirmation form and don't vote for another 4 years or 2 federal election cycles. Earlier this year, Ohio removed 265,000 voters from its rolls. Now the state is moving once again to purge an additional 235,000 voters. Joining us now to discuss this voter disenfranchisement is the author of The Money Democracy Money Can Buy, investigative journalist Greg Palast. Greg, this is when we talk about voter suppression, we talk about voter disenfranchisement. This is all a design of the Republican Party to shrink the potential voting pool to keep them to win elections, to keep Democrats at bay. That's all this is.
Let me be very blunt about it. I've been investigating vote suppression for 20 years. I've been focusing on Ohio, Georgia, Florida, and a couple of other states. And there is zero question, absolutely none, Roland, that this is a method of keeping black, young, and other minority voters out of the polling stations in Ohio. It is the purge of now getting to 500,000 Ohioans is completely erroneous. It's not just filled with errors like the New York Times reported. New York Times said 40,000 of 235,000 removals are wrong. I got to tell you, I hired the best database and addressed experts in Silicon Valley. We went through the same method that was used in Ohio by the GOP secretaries of state to remove black voters and other voters in Ohio, that they did the same trick in Georgia last year in 2018. And I sued the GOP Secretary of State, a guy named Brian Kemp. He purged 500,000 people, just like in Ohio, while he's running for governor against Stacey Abrams, first black woman ever to run for a governor in America. And we went through literally name by name, Roland, name by name, and determined that 340,134 voters, over 1/3 voters, were wrongly removed. It's not statistical sampling. We went through name by name. The 40,000 names that were identified as wrong in Ohio, that was a lot of work done by the League of Women Voters, but they were just, taking samples and bits and pieces. We actually got the experts to go through each name with computers. And it was over 70% wrong, way over 70% wrong in Georgia. We know it's at least that's because the same method, 70% wrong in Ohio. This is a way to remove 1/3 voters before the 2020 election because Trump and his gang cannot win Ohio unless they suppress the vote. It's a long Jim Crow game that they've been playing in Ohio. This is not new.
But here's the thing, Greg, and this is the key here. It was a white man who sued Ohio, who took this case all the way to the Supreme Court. I keep telling white folks in America, you better, especially if you are a young voter, even if you're an elderly voter, they want to keep them as well. And so I was at a panel on the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation last year, and I told all of the civil rights people, y'all better be trying to also talk to these young white folks because they are being disenfranchised.
In fact, let me explain how they do it and why it's disenfranchisement. That means, by the way, that's a fancy word for getting shafted out of your vote and being wiped off the voter rolls. Why that affects young people, including, by the way, in Florida, my daughter, who is a student. Here's the rule that was used in Ohio in a case that went to the Supreme Court called the A. Philip Randolph Institute versus John Husted, who's their Secretary of State. Husted said, under the National Voter Registration Act, you cannot lose your vote for not voting. Now, you read the papers, you read the New York Times, you read the Washington Post, and say, oh, you're losing your vote because you didn't vote. That's against the law, Roland. It's right in the National Voter Registration Act that you cannot lose your vote for not voting Because in America, you have the right to vote. You also have the right to not vote. So what's going on here? Because John Husted, the Ohio Secretary of State, like Brian Kemp, the guy who stole the election in Georgia, they're using the same trick. They're saying, we're not removing people because they didn't vote. Not voting is simply evidence that they've moved. And how do we know? Well, we don't just use not voting. As you mentioned before, you get a postcard. Now, so you don't vote a couple of elections, you get a postcard, maybe you miss another election, and they take you off the voter rolls. Does that mean you've moved because you haven't voted or you didn't respond to their postcard? Not at all. That's why we got the guys who work for Amazon and eBay and American Express. By the way, you notice that to prove, and they said 300 in Georgia, 340,134 people had never ever moved, and yet they were removed, purged from the voter rolls. Ohio's using the same faulty method deliberately. Why? Are you ready for this? When you use postcards, it's actually a racist Jim Crow trick. Because when you send out postcards to people and expect a response and say your vote's only saved if you return the postcard, what that requires is that you get the postcard. Now, if you're a student like my daughter who moves dorms every year, you won't get the postcard. You lose your vote. If you are a renter, who rents? Low-income people, people of color, people in urban areas. We had a woman in Georgia who literally moved her apartment within a single building, so the postcard was not forwarded to her to return. So if you're a renter and you're moving about, and by the way, even if you move within your county, you don't have to re-register to vote, but you won't get that card and they'll take you off the voter rolls. So it's according to the census, a white older person owning a house in a suburb is 600% more likely to return a card than a young urban voter who's a renter. And in other words, it's very simple. You use the postcard trick. White people respond. Poor people, young people, people who move, renters, voters of color are not going to respond. They know it. And that's why they're using that postcard trick. And even not voting in a midterm, as you well know, because of gerrymandering, you've got this issue where you have a lot of districts where if you're black and you're either put into a white district where your vote is drowned and so you don't bother to vote in a midterm, or you're in a stacked district where, like in John Lewis's district in Atlanta, he doesn't have an opponent. So why would you bother to vote, right? So again, the bias is baked in. The Jim Crow tactic is brilliant.
Man, I've been warning people about this stuff for years, and it is rearing its ugly head. Greg Palast, we appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
You're the best, Roland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joining me right now, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, political analyst, Dr. Julian Malveaux, economist, president emerita Bennett College, Julian Boykin, founder, chairman, Young Republicans of Maryland, also. SHAMEFUL, you in the house?
I am, Roland. I'm
in
here.
The house as well. I want to first start with, let's go to Julian. Start with you. Look, this is very simple, and that is Supreme Court has allowed Ohio to do what they're doing, which is, I think, pathetic. And then today, of course, the Supreme Court also invalidated a judicial decision and determined that Michigan's districts there are political gerrymandering. Of course, they had their previous ruling where they said they can't make a determination, which is weak as hell. They can't decide what's political gerrymandering, which is nonsense. But this is clear voter disenfranchisement. Republicans are doing this across the country. Democrats are not. Why? Why are Republicans insisting on disenfranchising voters or purging them from the voting rolls? Because they didn't vote? Really?
I don't think it's right to take away a person's right to vote, especially if they're entitled to it. The voter suppression is real, and it's been going on for a long time. You know, the underlying message behind it, you know, when you suppress the voter rights, you cut out the numbers. You know, when you do that, you have an underlying message behind it where, you know, the ultimate goal is to win. You know, I think if you have a strong message.
But Julian, does it offend you that your party is doing it?
It does, because I think if you have a strong platform, you should let the people decide for themselves. You know, I think if you have to cheat in order to win, you know, there's an underlying message behind it. Me, if I'm gonna run, I'm just gonna run and let the people decide for themselves and not have to, you know, result to voter suppression.
SHAMEFUL, this is what I have consistently said. This is why black people will not really consider Republicans. If you mess with the right to vote, black folks are not playing that game. Right. So when it comes to this issue, when it comes to gerrymandering, when it comes to voter suppression, when it comes to all the little gimmicks and the games being played, and Republicans in D.C. and across the country, they got no problem with it because it's about winning.
Well, no, you're right. And I think for African Americans, the idea of voting and suppression with voting, particularly as it pertains to us, has been a very systemic issue. And so my hope, Roland, now that we know that this problem exists, I think you have organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You have Black Voters Matter, which is a relatively new organization by LaTosha Brown that are focusing on some of these issues in places like Flint, Michigan, where a lot of people aren't focusing on how African Americans are being disenfranchised there as relates to voting. So I'm curious to figure out how we can transform this through the legal system, meaning we challenge this in the courts, but also how on the activist side we continue to make sure that African Americans are aware of what's going on, number one, and number two, we need to make sure that we're taking every single step we possibly can so that we can build the strongest case possible for those folks on the legal side that challenge these things through the judiciary.
But Julian, here's the problem. The Supreme Court has ruled. They are the law of the land. They have given the green light to states like Ohio to purge their voting rolls uninhibited.
The Supreme Court clearly is wrong, but they are the law of the land. They're our highest court. So I think SHAMEFUL is right that we need to look at, keep bringing these cases. But the other thing, you talk about the activist, SHAMEFUL. I don't think if we want to get the vote out, we're going to have to go ground crew and go door to door and talk to people. Are you registered? But that is an additional burden to African American voters. And the fact is that they're not treated the same way. Our voting system is Byzantine. If we compare it to other parts of the world, I mean, some people have same-day registration. That would be a help, but they don't want that. Some folks, you vote by mail. In some countries, you have the election day off so that you don't have to leave work early, go to work late, whatever, to vote. So clearly what Republicans want is to suppress the vote because they know what the demographics look like and what the possibilities are. And clearly, y'all, black Republicans, y'all need to stand up to your party. I mean, you all are African American. You have the same legacy of voter suppression as black Democrats do. And really, you need to stand up to your party. The reason why the Republican Party is so white is because black folks are turned off by tactics that basically disenfranchise them and push us back to the Jim Crow era. So that's why, and both of y'all are intelligent young men, but y'all need to step up.
Avis, this is a huge issue because these states get to decide how they want to remove folks from the voting rolls. The Supreme Court has said they can. And as Greg laid out very clearly, they play these gimmicks with how the postcards even look, where you think it's junk mail.
Every trick in the book, they're definitely going to try. And this is, as has been alluded to, this is an outcome of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, which has yet to be corrected. We've talked about this a lot on this show, Roland. What we're seeing right now is a political party that understands the shifting demographics of this nation and has made the calculated decision that they don't want to play fair, that they don't want to take their ideas to the marketplace and actually judge on the quality of their ideas and run on those ideas. No, what they want to do is subvert the fairness of our democracy, specifically by making it much more difficult for people of color and young people and the very elderly in these circumstances to vote for them, the elderly poor to vote for them as well. It is a calculated strategy in order to solidify white minority rule for decades to come, even as the overall demographics of this nation continue to shift. It is insidious, and until we not only change the voting rights, but also, even though it is an extra burden, make sure that we have organizations that are willing to go out there to do the hard work to maximize voter registration, to make sure that to help people be able to double check to see if their voter registration status is actually up to date before the election, we will once again find ourselves in a situation the day after saying that election was stolen. So unfortunately, it's an extra burden, but we're going to have to take on that extra burden if we're going to fight under these circumstances.
Last question for Julian and Shermichael. I have said this for years. To Julian's point, I believe that Black conservatives must speak as a unifying voice in calling out the party when it comes to voter suppression. I think about when Colin Powell, when McCrory was the governor of North Carolina, and Powell went there, and McCrory was sitting in that audience, and Powell called that governor out for his voter suppression tactics. And again, I've been saying this for several years. Why won't Black Republicans, as a unifying voice, stand up and say to the party in D.C., these state parties and local, stop voter suppression, voter disenfranchisement?
Who do you want first, Roland?
Take your pick. One of you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, look, Roland, I think a lot of people are concerned with self-preservation, right? How can I prolong my status in the party? How can I seek financial gains and whatever other benefits they may find intriguing for themselves? And as a result of that, I think that really does sort of hinder a lot of people from moving forward, speaking out on some of these things that they subconsciously or at least consciously should know are morally and ethically objectionable. With that said, however, I do think you have a few voices. I happen to be one of the more better known voices who are saying, hey guys, wait a minute here, we need to change the way we're doing things. You talked about how the demographics are changing, at least Dr. Avis did. The reality is when those demographic changes become more transparent in the next 10 years, Roland, most urban centers are going to be overly populated by Black and brown people. What that means is, electorally speaking, as it relates to national politics, most states will be able to decide who's going to be the victor of said state. And more than likely, those states are going to lead blue, which means Republicans are going to see a decreasing number of states to rely on for electoral advantages. So while they're playing around with these, I guess, strategies, if you will, where they have seen some judicial success, in the long term, Roland, those successes will not overstand what the reality is, and that is the demographic changes. So I agree with the premise of your question that more Black conservatives should speak out. I'm just not, I guess, hopeful or realistic that those odds are going to change anytime soon with more Black Republicans speaking out.
Julian, will Black Republicans get some guts and speak as a collective, not individuals? Shermichael is right. Individuals have done it. I believe there's more power when y'all speak as a collective. Your thoughts?
Definitely more power in numbers. I think we need a lot more Black conservatives. You know, you don't see too many of us, but at the same time, like Shermichael was saying.
No, but Julian, you're not going to get more Black conservatives if the Republicans keep suppressing the vote. That's my point.
Yeah, we have to speak as a collective unit. And with that, you know, we have to, once we speak as a collective unit, we have to stay together. You know, like to Shermichael's point, it's a good possibility that a lot of these states that are red could turn blue, to the point where now, you know, if we do speak up, is it too late? So
No, it's not. No, it's not too late.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Folks, Life Luxe Jazz Experience taking place in Cabo, November 7th through the 11th. Of course, if you want to attend, go to lifeluxejazz.com, LIFELUXEJAZZ.com. But if you cannot be in Cabo for those 4 days, 14 different amazing artists, then of course you could live stream it. Get your live stream pass at gfntv.com. That's gfntv.com. As I said, amazing artists: Gerald Albright, Alice Bouillon, Kirk Whalum, Donna McClurkin, Shalia, Roy Ayers. Man, it's going to be an unbelievable 3-day extravaganza. And so look forward to you participating. And again, get your live streaming pass to cover those 3 days, all 14 concerts. You'll be able to watch right here on your phone, on your iPad, computer. Does not matter. Go to gfntv.com. That's gfntv.com to get your live stream pass. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.